You are listening to a recording from the Cooperating to Build a Better Nova Scotia conference in Halifax, a celebration marking the United Nations International Year of Cooperatives.
When people start talking about co-ops, but the question that I want to ask is why? Why are you interested in co-ops? And my answer on that is that a cooperative is never the destination. It's never it isn't the co-op that you want. The co-op is the vehicle that you use to get to where you want.
Excellent.
To what you want. In other words, you should have a destination, and then the co-op would help you to reach that destination to some extent. It's one of the things that will help you. So like for instance, back of the anti-Ganesha movement was not cooperatives at all. It was adult education. That was the big concern. And then the company that I was thinking about, couldn't think the other day, I'm pretty sure it was the Carnegie Corporation.
Oh.
And because they were great philanthropic, they are interested in all kinds of community things. Anyway, adult education, that was the anti-Ganesha movement. There are all kinds of social interest. The very first cooperative on record was the Christian church starting. When Christianity began in Jerusalem, that Jerusalem congregation were absolutely convinced that the end of the world was coming right away. So what those Christians did was to prepare for the end. They put all their goods together, and they ate their meals together. They put all their goods together and then distributed out to people as they needed it while they waited for the end to come.
This is wonderful.
It really was. That's the first co-op really on work. I guess you might call it a kind of a distributive kind of co-op. But of course, other Christians just didn't believe the world was coming to an end that fast, and it didn't. And so just pooling their goods and distributing them until the goods were all gone is not much good. But the principle was good. The idea was that they were working together. They were working together to achieve an end, which would be for the benefit of everybody in the group, you see. Now that's what I mean by having a destination and then using a co-op to reach that destination.
Well, that's fascinating that you should mention the end of the world, because that shows up again and again as kind of a binding motive. It can be a binding motivation for people's social reality.
No doubt about it at all. No doubt about that. And then the co-op movement as such didn't just plant a seed and then burst that seed open and growth. It came here and there and everywhere. But history will say that the very first cooperative began in around 1800, and the father of cooperatives for North America anyway. Other countries may feel differently. The father of cooperatives here is a man by the name of Robert Owen, and Robert Owen he worked in a great big factory in Scotland, and because this is back in the Industrial Revolution period, eventually he bought this one particular factory, and he was still an industrialist, but he had the idea that if people are going to work for him, they get more work out of them if they were happy. Get more work from them if they were healthy, and so in New Lanark in Scotland, 1799, he bought this factory and immediately turned it into a cooperative. But the community had grown up around that factory, so it ended up with the whole community being a cooperative. The families living and working together and sharing together, working in the factory, and he was sharing his profits and so on for better wages and that sort of thing. Even though he was still an industrialist. Now that was Robert Owen, so he's considered to be the father of cooperatives as far as Canada, or perhaps even the United States was concerned. And in England, of course. But almost 50 years after that, 1844, in a community called Rochdale, which had weaving industry, and the weavers couldn't get credit. They couldn't afford credit, and if they didn't get credit, they just couldn't build, or they couldn't buy. They couldn't manage their life very well. So they got together, and they formed the first credit union. You can call it that. It was what they decided was that if we can't get credit from financiers or banks or whatever, we'll provide our own. So they began meeting, and they began putting in a few pennies here and there, and so until they built up enough money to be able to lend it to themselves. And over that period, they hammered out a number of principles which are still the foundation principles for the cooperative movement and for the credit unions. Credit unions are really another credit kind of cooperative.
Well, now I'm anxious to hear about those principles, because often people make the disconnection between the credit unions and the cooperatives, and I'm not sure why, but I'm interested in those principles.
The credit union is a cooperative that provides credit. Mm-hmm. A producer cooperative is a cooperative that produces goods, mostly farm goods and that kind of thing. There are lots of cooperatives. Well, take Just Us, for instance. Do you know anything about
Very well, yes.
Just Us is mainly one big cooperative. That's the Roasters Cooperative. And they do pretty well everything. Like they buy the coffee beans, they grind them, they package them, they market them, they have to get into financing and property and all those things, but it's a cooperative. Everybody who works for Just Us is part of that company, the Roasters Cooperative.
And I believe they source their beans from other cooperatives globally.
But the interesting thing is, for them, well, this is the big thing, and the profit-making thing, which is shared by the members who work there, their workers and so on, is that there are two other co-ops. One is that this big operation, Just Us, needed finances. So they formed a financing organization, a cooperative organization. And altogether apart from the roasters co-op. And this financial thing,
right.
People become members, $1,000, give you a membership. You can put more in if you like, but you still only have one vote. And this cooperative just builds up finances like a bank. And whenever the roasters need money to do some big thing, they just use the money that's in that capital. That's there, either thousands of dollars. It's so secure that government allows them to use that financing co-op for our RSPs if people want to. People can invest in that as an RSP. So,
if I could just add here, sorry for interrupting, but during the most recent economic problems that we're having in North America, Ralph Nader, the famous consumer advocate, wrote a piece saying that yes, the charter banks and so on and so forth indeed got themselves into a real mess with other people's money, but that the credit union system in the United States did not suffer the same fate because of their conservative banking practices. And in fact, they have specialized credit unions down there for special needs.
And that's true, but it's only half the truth.
Good.
The other half is that credit unions from the beginning are interested in the local people, local community, the individuals, to provide credit for themselves. They're not just following good financial principles, but they're interested in the local community. For instance,
the two may go together.
Royal Bank, when the Royal Bank started expanding and becoming a world institution, they got less interested in the local community. So they had little banks all over the place. They began to close them up.
Yes.
The bank, I don't know if it was Royal Bank or not, but the bank in over your way, the foot of the mountain.
Canning.
They closed it. At Kingsport and Canning.
Yeah.
In those places.
Scotiabank, but nonetheless, I'm sure the same point.
Yeah, in many places they closed, and places like New Ross, for instance, never did have a bank, but they had a credit union, and now the credit union is being used more than ever before, because people don't bother going out to Bridgewater or Chester for banking, you know?
Well, it's interesting. I could add that the experience over in Canning was that, in fact, people were dissatisfied with the practices of that bank there, and effectively replaced
they weren't
it.
interested in the community.
Exactly. So the people replaced it with a credit union. So you go over there now, and there's a credit union, but there's no Scotiabank.
Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah.
Pardon me, but we're supposed to be no logo, but at the same time, it's the examples are accurate.
Yeah. Well, just one thing to get back to just us again.
Yes.
There is a third co-op, because in order for them to roast coffee beans, they had to know where to get them. And so they went down to Mexico and found little farmers who had just a few trees or whatever and couldn't produce very much. So nobody would buy. So the only way they could sell their coffee beans was to the big coffee companies who had big estates in Mexico. And so these big companies just gave them pittance, whatever they felt they wanted to give them, and that was all. So Just Us went down there, got the community to gather together. Several of these little farmers, little producers, and and they formed their co-op. So now they are producing together, the same in the way, but some people are putting in so many bushels each year, so many other more bushels and that sort of thing. But they are also working together to produce better coffee beans. They're learning how to minister their own lands, and Just Us is giving them leadership in that. So it's good. Just Us is helping themselves, but that community is helping themselves. Now that community co-op is getting to the point where they can dictate to Just Us if they want to. You know?
Yes.
So it's been a wonderful thing, and some of those farmers have come up to Nova Scotia to see what's going on here. Some of the coffee makers here, coffee roasters here, have been going down to Mexico.
Yes.
But of course now Just Us is branching out into other things. They're branching out into tea.
Yes.
And into other countries. They're branching out into cocoa, or chocolate, and so on. So the thing is, that's not the objective. That's not the end. That's their way of, the end is building up the community. and that's why no co-op should just get so interested in the co-op that they forget why they're existing. You see?
Yes, I do. And the community that is being built here, in addition to, being accessible to all manner of people, all demographic, is also building up a community of cooperatives, which is always been the interesting notion to me, is that you can't eliminate competition. What you can do, though, is you can compete with cooperation, and I think people will realize those values and make choices, and that's always in the democratic interest, I guess you could say.
Yeah, exactly. Well, if Moses Cody, when he got started on the Antigonish movement, it was an adult education program. That's what Carnegie was interested in. That's what the university was interested in. And he chose cooperatives as the vehicle for adult education. And he himself never lost that vision that it was adult education that he was interested in. It was the education of people who never had very much schooling, or who never was able to get university training and that kind of thing. And he, in the development of the co-ops, even to get a co-op started, he worked on education. He had little kitchen groups of farmers and neighbors meeting week after week after week to study. But then he found there was a problem. And the problem was that once they got the co-op, they didn't keep on the education as much as they should have.
Thank you.
He worked very hard at that. But
so this is one of those critical points that you were mentioning earlier that we need to try to.
But he used to say, and I've heard him over and over and over say, that if you're going to start something, whether it's education or social or whatever, you really have to start with bread and butter things.
Practical.
Bread and butter concerns. But he said the danger is to stick just with bread and butter and don't move. So you should never lose that vision.
That's right.
Of education, or of community development, or of peace, or whatever you're working for. And the co-op then becomes the vehicle to fulfill that vision. And that's the biggest thing. That's the biggest thing in the world. Moses Cody wrote his little book, which is still pretty fundamental. He called it. What did he call it? Oh gosh.
Huh. I'm at a loss myself.
Masters of their own.
Yes.
Masters of their own.
Destiny.
Destiny. Yes. Yeah. And
which is a film.
Yes.
That they showed at the local co-op theater.
Oh yeah. Yes. Well, it was a simple little book, very simple, but it was the point that he was trying to put out. You see, he had a lot of difficulties to work against, but and that's still true.
Yeah.
I used to work with. I helped to get co-ops going and so on, but I can remember a little later in my life, that I also got interested in home and school association. You know.
Sure.
And we were developing regional schools. We were developing regional high schools, and the whole school pattern was changing. So the home and school organization was very important, and we had a couple of people in Nova Scotia who just went from community to community to community all over Nova Scotia to get the home and school started. And the idea was to get parents, in particular, any community adults, together to catch the vision of our school, of our educational system, to catch that vision. But those two people that I speak of worked so hard to get the home and school organization started that they almost forgot the vision. Mm-hmm. And I remember arguing with both of them, because I was a county president of home and school, and then for a few years I was provincial president. And I remember talking to those two and I said, I find it very unfortunate that some people get so involved in creating a vehicle that they forget where they're going.
That's right. And in our times, it becomes vital. A colleague yesterday was talking about, it was a doctor actually, talking about anti-planning that there is in the culture. So much preoccupation with the moment, and this may be associated with consumerism, I'm not sure, but that I know, and again, I can't compete in terms of talking about my later years yet, but where I've been found myself through associations with cooperatives is looking at that planning function. What are the methods that can be used for planning? Because it's out of that the vision occurs.
Well, it's to me it's vital to know where you're going. If you don't know where you're going, why do you buy a car?
Good idea. I wouldn't want to be anyone if the captain of the ship isn't clear about that.
Exactly. So, but if you get a good car, there's not much point in just sitting in it and driving around so everybody can see it. Unless you're going to go somewhere, you know.
I suppose then you can go in style.
Well, I don't know. I just get enthusiastic about these things, and I really don't have much to say any more than keeping the vision,
yes,
and using the co-op as and there are thousands of kinds of co-ops, you know,
yes,
for various purposes, but they're always centered in people.
Yes,
because for me, people have to be, first of all, they have to be free. They have to be able to be free to make their own decisions, to decide their life. They have to be free for that as individuals. But that means that they shouldn't have to be slaves of a business or slaves of a church even. They need to be free. But there is a price to pay. And people need to realize what that price is. In order to be free, they have to be responsible.
Beautiful.
And that responsibility involves a recognition of the fact that everybody else has to be free. I can't make a slave out of you in order to enjoy my freedom. And so we can't impose on other people. And that's what people forget.
Yes.
They want to be free, like these big businesses now. They want to be free to run their business, run Canada's economy and so on. But they forget that to do that, they have to be responsible for Canada's life, for the life of Canada, the life of Canadians. And they can't be free to take advantage of me.
Beautiful. Yes.
They just can't be free to
That's
be.
right.
That's what I mean. So the price to pay is what we often forget. And that's the kind of vision that I have.
Yes.
And
well, as we look,
and the reason I enjoy co-ops is that by and large, co-ops feel their sense of responsibility. I went to an annual meeting of the Just Us investors.
Right.
They head, I don't know what they call him, foreman, manager, or whatever, of the Roasters Co-op gave his report, and he said that, as part of his report, he said that he was very interested to have for the Roasters to develop an educational program. He wanted this educational program to include everybody here, but everybody in Mexico or wherever they were buying their goods and so on. And I thought that was quite a wonderful object on his part. So after he was through, I asked the meeting if there was anything, when he made this point, if there was anything he wanted the Roasters, the investors to do. And he answered, and then so I stood up and I said I'll make a motion that this investors co-op totally supports you in whatever you want to do by way of educational program. And it went through unanimously.
Oh, imagine.
So that's where they were almost ready to forget their responsibility. But their responsibility is for everybody, you see. And so anyway.
Beautiful. Well, one of my big discoveries is the social arrangements that we make we've accepted are the social design. So, and thank you very much for helping me with putting together my thoughts about all of this. But essentially, there is an assumption that people operate in groups and communities and so on, workplaces, using the same design as a beehive, which has a queen bee or a king bee at the head, and everybody simply takes direction. And one of the big learnings for me was that when you have that kind of situation established, the ability for other ranks to take responsibility for that vision or the product or whatever it might be becomes absolutely limited. And I believe that for human beings, or I've come to understand that for human beings, that social arrangement is not necessarily our only choice. The other choice may look like groups of responsible people period,
Yeah.
without the
Yeah.
kings, queens, and etc.
The Roman Empire, starting before Christianity started, was based on just that point. It was based on the fact that, to become a Roman citizen was quite a wonderful thing, and everybody looked forward to becoming a Roman citizen. St. Paul, as a Christian, was put in prison by the Jews at one point, and he said, you can't take any action because I'm a Roman citizen. And one of the Jews said, I'm a Roman citizen. I paid a great price to become a Roman citizen. Paul said, I was born one. So I guess what I'm getting at is that in the empire, to be a Roman citizen, you were totally looked after. They provided the peace. They allowed you to have a piece of land. They allowed you to do this and that and the other thing. Unfortunately, in order to be a Roman citizen, you had to give your life totally to the emperor.
Interesting.
If he needed soldiers in the army, you just went. There's no way out of it. If you got killed off, that's too bad. So there was always a payoff, you see, but total obedience was what they required, and total obedience is detrimental to a person's freedom. You see, I don't know how we can get around that.
Well, our times may be dictating that, you see, the times we live in, that part of the obedience went with a period when people were in competition for resources, and we can't sustain that competition over as yet undiscovered or free resources. What we have is that our resources are fairly limited in our system, and that to compete over them makes it very difficult to deal with the questions at hand, which are, how do we live in a place together that will support us?
Yeah, and I think you're right. How do we get around this business of obedience? I'll make a point, and then I'll give you a good illustration. I'm obedient to my bishop. I always had been. Bishop is my superior officer, and I've always been obedient to him. On the other hand, I never ceased, and I kept telling the bishop that I never ceased being free to tell the bishop what I thought of him, or anything like that. And so what I say about my obedience is this: my obedience is not because the bishop demands it, but because I'm willing to give it. I'm always free to give my obedience, and I'm just as free to take it back whenever I want to. And that's how I get around obedience. But a lot of people will argue with me, and they will say, well, you can't run a business unless your manager tells you what to do and you do it, and all that. I said, well, there is an illustration. And the best illustration I can think of is a sailing ship. I have a step-grandson who's spending his whole life working on a sailing ship. And I learned something from him. And it's this, that on a sailing ship, everybody is a crew member. I mean, they have passengers, but but they don't really want passengers. Everyone is a crew member. But everybody has a function. And it's at the life of every individual, life of the captain himself, totally depends on that individual, whether he's the cook's helper or whatever he is. But the life of the captain down depends on each individual doing his job. Not because it's demanded by the captain, but if he fails to do it, everybody's life is in jeopardy. You see what I mean?
I do.
And so it's a matter of a balance between freedom and responsibility. Because if I'm helping the cook, then I have to be free, but at the same time I have to understand that my responsibility, that I am totally responsible for everybody on that boat. And when a storm comes, nobody, absolutely nobody on a sailing ship, when a storm comes, nobody waits for orders from the captain. They just unconsciously and automatically do what absolutely has to be done. It may be that the captain has choices and he can give them, that's fine, and they're ready to do it. But the safety of that boat doesn't really depend on the captain any more than it depends on me over here holding an anchor in my hand or whatever. You see what I mean?
I do, and it sounds pretty democratic to me.
That's democracy. Yes, and that's why people should be free, but nobody has a right to be free unless he's ready to accept that responsibility, and that's what we often overlook, and I say responsibility, not that I have to be responsible for this so much as what I mean is that I have to be ready to give my obedience. I mean, there's no reason why I never disobey my bishop, but I don't do it because he demanded it. I do it because I'm free to give it. You see what I mean? Yeah. And that's the way it should be. That's the way it should be.
One of the things that distinguishes cooperation versus competition is that you can learn that reality that you describe, but you can't.
Exactly.
It cannot be imposed. I cannot impose responsibility on you. You will accept it because you've learned that it has a value, or that it works, or something as simple as that.
Yeah, as simple as that. Yeah, that's right. The captain of that ship, that big passenger ship that ran on the rocks in Italy or wherever it was.
Off Spain, yes.
Yeah. He just failed he didn't fail as a captain, he failed his responsibility. That was he just made the wrong decisions. And
same as the Exxon Valdez.
Put everybody's life in jeopardy.
That's right.
Yeah. And that's what I mean.
These are very critical matters. I mean, and these are the times we need to be looking at how we live, what our social arrangements are now, because that's what it all falls back to. It's what we do collectively now determines our future, and it is our right to determine our own futures.
Our Lord talked about His kingdom. And we keep praying in the daily prayer that Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, you see. But Pilate, the Roman governor, asked her, "Are you a king?" And he said, "Well, that's what you call me." He said, he said, "My kingdom is not of this world." And some people think that he meant that it's outside of this world. He didn't mean that. He meant that His kingdom is nothing like anything in this world. And then when He was talking with His disciples, a couple of His disciples came to Him one time and they said, we have a question we want to ask. What was that? They said, when you come into your kingdom, we want to ask you if we can sit at your side, one on each side of you. You know, in a position of kingly position, you see.
Positional, social,
yeah. And our Lord said, he said, that can't be. He said, there aren't any positions like that. He said, kingdoms that you talk about, he said, have authority figures who pass laws and give orders and that sort of thing. But he said, there won't be anyone like that in my kingdom. There isn't anybody who has that kind of authority. He has that kind of position where he makes decisions, but he's totally responsible to everybody else, and they are responsible for their jobs, you see?
And
so,
as you pointed out earlier, it may only be 1% of the decisions, or the ones that are equal to his learning and experience and knowledge.
Yeah, I get mad as hatter about these big companies, these big international companies, who say that. Even they said, Wall Street said to Obama when he was first elected, that we want to be free to run the economy. We have a right to be free. That's what the economy is all about. The marketplace is all about. But they weren't responsible, so they started lending money and they started taking out mortgages and so on, and the whole world suffered. You know, in 2008, when the market slumped all over the place, and they still demand that. And poor Obama, when he was 2 years the president, the House of Representatives had an election, and they got the majority there. And so they blocked everything that Obama wanted to do, and they're still blocking it. And because they want their freedom, but they don't want any responsibility. And they even wanted the freedom after the United States government took trillions of dollars and gave it to them to bail them out of the mess they got into. And it's the first time that I ever heard the word trillion being used.
But there is a delusion that prevails, and maybe this is the place where we can personalize it a little bit. The family tree that Wendy, your daughter-in-law, and myself are associated with out of Yarmouth, essentially over time went from deepest of poverty in the time of the Depression, like everybody else was going through, and then by virtue of being sea captains in their day, also went through huge fortunes. Yeah. So the family history is one of, much like the tides, where the family was wealthy, phenomenally wealthy, and then was poverty. But the poverty was shared. The wealth was not necessarily shared. Yeah. And I'm, I guess, eternally grateful for that experience, rather than always being the top dog.
Yeah, yeah.
Or always poor.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we need to be individuals, because that's the way we were created. Mm-hmm. We're individuals. But there's no way in the world in which an individual can survive without other individuals. When you were born, it was years before you could do without your mother and father. And what I'm getting at is that everybody needs to be free, but everybody needs to be part of everybody else. At the time of the Reformation, there was one Anglican priest who was Dean of St. Paul's in London, and he was a great preacher and a great poet, and he wrote a poem which is still known and quoted by everybody. And he starts out something like this: "No man is an island. Everyone is part of the main," or he just said mainland. Everyone is part of the mainland. And back in those days, when anybody died in a community, someone used to go and toll the bell, you know, and the church bell. And if the person who died was 21 years old, the bell tolled 21 times. So everybody listened and counted.
For whom the bell tolled.
For whom the bell tolled. So this man said, send not to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that beautiful?
That's beautiful. That's
beautiful.
Wonderful. Well,
Yeah.
the whole conversation has been beautiful.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. Well,
Let's see what we have.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't have anything more to say. I'm sorry I talked too much.